people. But we're going to talk about, does America prove that multi-ethnic civic nationalism is sustainable? Because I think this one is very adjacent to the Vivek Ramaswamy and culture sort of question.
I think that America does prove that multi-ethnic civic nationalism is sustainable. I guess the question is which ethnicity. And at that point in time, you're going to piss people off. But the original American experiment, Puritan, Protestant, Anglo men, right? The early American fight was whether or not German was going to be the English language. It was going to be the national language. So the ethnic strife at the time was between, the English and the Germans. And at the time, of course, the English won out. So, but I think they worked out their problems. I mean, in the Civil War, there was so much ethnic mixing amongst the Union soldiers. I mean, I think the Confederates eventually brought back black soldiers in at the end. They were so desperate. They realized that they were so exclusive to the point that they had destroyed themselves. They were so homogenous that they were inbred. They had retarded themselves, literally. Because yes, there's an evolutionary concept where sexual reproduction occurs. You have males and females, and then we share 50% of our DNA, and this gives us resistance to disease, right, and bacteria. This is a way for evolution. Sexual reproduction exists as a way for us to stave off diseases that are attacking us at all times. But then there's asexual reproduction, right? And when you have asexual reproduction, you're creating clones, and everybody has the same DNA. So what happens is that it's a lot easier for the viruses to come in and kill you. So I think that ethnic mixing, I think, can actually strengthen a society. Scottish, Irish, and English. I mean, if you ask an Irish how they feel about the British, they're going to have a very strong opinion of themselves as an ethnic group. But if you ask an American, to tell the difference, they're going to have a hard time telling the difference between an Irish or a Scottish or things like that. So I think some ethnicities are more compatible than others. And as soon as you start to delineate between them, then you get called a bigot and you get canceled. So
yeah, well, right, of course, right. That's a great point. Obviously, you can if we're using relatively narrowly scoped ethnicities, America's always been a multi-ethnic nation. I think, of course, as we broaden that to larger groupings of ethnicity, I think this one is pretty unclear. I don't think, by the way, disagreeing with this means that you need to endorse, complete ethno-nationalism. It's this is just an experiment, and America is substantially more ethnically mixed than it ever has been in its history. It does seem like there is more fraying along these lines, than there was in the past. And so I think it's far from conclusive that this sort of holds and lasts over time. I don't think the opposite of this is you can only have a 100% homogenous West European nation. You can only have Anglos. I think there is some evidence that small amounts of different types of people can be brought in, that there are compatible people from elsewhere, but to have the confidence, I would just be a conservative about this, because to me, you are playing with sort of civilization itself. And I optimistically would I do think, I want to believe and think there's some evidence to there sort of being natural Americans everywhere, just at vastly different rates, depending on the places that we're talking about. Well, but it's just unclear. It's not clear. And look, I liked Vivek. We talked about Vivek and Calder. I liked Vivek. I don't think at the same time that it's a given that you could have an America that was 98% Indians. That could ever be the same thing, even if you had all Vivek Indians.
No, but I mean, you're collectivizing Indians entirely. I mean, he is from the Brahmin class.
I understand.
So then maybe Brahmins only. But I mean, ask yourself this: when you do polling on the Asian communities, for example, they're not all a monolith, right? So the Vietnamese that came over, the millions of Vietnamese that have settled in the United States, are extremely capitalistic. Many of them embrace, they're much more capitalistic than Africans who were brought here under slavery. And so therefore some ethnicities, some of them, well, so I'm just using as an example, but there are subsets of Asian populations that are more pro-free market, pro-free trade, pro-liberty than others, and even Chinese populations in the United States. When I ran for Senate and we did polling, the Asian communities specifically were, and again, there's a very small amount of them in Missouri, so small sample size, but they were extremely pro-Austin Petersen, which we thought was strange, and I wanted to study more about that. They weren't like pro any of the other Republican candidates so much. It wasn't just, oh, he's a Republican, we like him. It was specifically Austin Petersen. So I went down to the Chinese market in Kansas City and started introducing myself and talking to these people, and they're like, no, we are capitalists. We believe in free markets and liberty and free trade and all that. I was like, oh, well, this is phenomenal. And here's an ethnicity that is extremely compatible with the United States and Vietnamese as well. I mean, nail salons, pho bars. I mean, there's certainly something within ethnicities that has a compatibility that you can gauge.
Sure. So I think there's a different question between, you can have a country that shares your values and you invite some amount of Vietnamese people in, versus you have a couple percent of Vietnamese or whatever, versus you could have the same or similar outcomes with a population that was 80 to 90% Vietnamese. That it's just about the ideas.
Maybe.
I think this is a much different claim, and I just don't think it's I don't think it's proven. Like I find the idea. I oddly find that the nation that I want is likely a mix of both civic and some consideration of ethnic nationalism, until you can prove that, or unless you can prove that that the civic side of it is enough. I would just be careful, because you haven't seen, because like for example, Asian cultures, I do believe they can be very capitalistic, but the values that I want are more than just capitalism and free markets. So for example, despite me saying that I want some homogeny or some shared culture, that actually, part of what that includes for me as part of a sharedness is an embracing of individualism, an embracing of weirdness. One of the differences between Asian and European cultures, why they might be shared in intelligence, social respect, their shopping cart returners or whatever, there is difference in how comfortable they are with individualism, people expressing themselves, innovation, diversity in the sort of good sense when people are exploring things in open-minded ways. And so would we get all of these things, all the things that created American dynamicism, exceptionalism, would you get that if it was 80% Southeast Asian, even if they are still capitalist?
Well,
I don't know.
If we want to avoid controversy, let's talk about the Jews.
Dude, I don't think you get America. You wouldn't get. I'm happy to bite the bullet with Jews. Like, I think a couple percent of Jews, they're spicy. They add things to the mix. Would you get America if you had 80% Jews? I don't think you'd get America.
You wouldn't have America without the Jews, because Chaim Solomon, the Jewish financier, was the reason that the American Revolution could happen. So thank you, Jews. But I'll say exactly. But I will say that largely Jews in the United States tend to lean left. Largely Jews in the United States are not libertarian. They're ethnic, and Jews are an ethnicity and a religion, which confuses things. But those questions kind of have to cut both ways. I mean, there is something authoritarian of the American tradition. And only 10 years of the American experiment, I think we've not been at war. Right. So do they not have as much a claim to the authoritarians who built this country as well? Do they not have as much a claim to this country as we do? I mean, we have to find a way to live in peace with people who don't share our values. And can the American experiment withstand people who don't share our values, who are not of our ethnicity, who disagree with us on these things? Can we create a system that actually allows us to live in peace? I think the United States largely has. But for new people coming in, I think there needs to be a stronger national test. I think that's really the question. I think that you probably should have to pass that same test in order to vote. Yeah. And before you can vote, that if you have to pass a citizenship test to become an American and vote, you should have to pass a citizenship test, the same test, to vote. And therein, right there, will probably be the great filter that you need.
Yeah, see, this is where it gets tricky, and we'll pivot into the next one for this, and I guess I'll just go ahead and go first, and we'll just keep this all flowing.